Okay. Once again, good afternoon to you all. Welcome to second class, second session of today's lectures. Right. This is the second class. So in this second class, we shall discuss on the course ENM 6112. That is on uh, Francis Bacon essays. Okay. So now let me briefly tell you about this course, this course is all about. So this British prose is all about. It is a course that covers some of the uh, most thoughtful, important, and beautifully like written essays in the English literary traditions. So these essays were written by great thinkers who reflected deeply on human life, society, morality, and truth, and also knowledge. So, uh, reading these essays will not only make you a better student of literature, and it will actually help you to think more clearly, with more effectively, and understands the world, more deeply. All right. So please pay attention to it. Yes. So in this course, in this lecture, we shall focus on as we did it in the previous lecture. We shall focus on block 1 of this course in British prose. That is on we shall focus on Francis Bacon essays. Unit 1 to 5. All right. Now let's go to the lecture contents. So these are the lecture contents. First, we shall see about the course overview, and then unit breakdown, and then learning goals, and then in-depth discussions of all the 5 units, and then again check your progress questions, and then some conclusion. We shall conclude the lecture. Now, this is the overview of this course, ENM's 6112, that is British prose. So there are 4 blocks. First, first block deals with Francis Bacon essays, and then second unit deals with Charles Lamb's, and third block deals with A.C. Gardner, and then block 4 deals with Bertrand Russell. So today we shall only focus on Francis Bacon. Now this is the unit breakdown of block 1, Francis Bacon. So unit 1 deals with op studies, unit 2 deals with op adversity, unit 3 deals with op marriage and single life, and unit 4 deals with op truth, and unit 5 deals with op revenge. Now these are the learning goals and outcomes. And I do I have to read all line by line, or so you can see it for yourself also. If I go through, if I read line by line, it will take time, right? So these are the four objectives, and on the right side, these are the course outcome, possible outcomes after having read this, topic, okay, of this block. So it's the 4 objectives and 4 outcomes. Now, let us move on to the next slides. That is on Francis Bacon, a brief profile. So before we discuss unit 1, or all unit 1 to 5, we have to understand about Francis Bacon himself, right? Without understanding about Francis Bacon, how can we discuss about his essays? All right. So let us take a few minutes on this Francis Bacon's life now. So uh, Francis Bacon was born in 1561 in London, that is in 16th century, in London, that is in England, and he died in the year 1626. Okay, so he lived during a remarkable period in English period, that is during the reigns of Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. That is, this period is also known as the Elizabethan age, and also Jacobean era. So it was a time of great intellectual, scientific, and artistic achievement. And think of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and also Philip Sidney, and who are Bacon was there actually. um, Francis Bacon was their contemporary of that period. So it was a period of exploration, both geographic and intellectual, when Europeans were not just discovering new continents, okay, but also questioning old beliefs and building new systems of knowledge. So Francis Bacon came from a distinguished political family. His father, like Sir Nicholas Bacon, was the Lord Keeper of the Great Shield under the Queen Elizabeth I, a very important government, position. So Francis Bacon grew up in a world of political power, legal authority, and intellectual ambitions. So he studied at Trinity College, Cambridge, and later trained as a lawyer at Gray's Inn. He eventually became a lawyer and then a member of parliament and rose through the political ranks under King James I and to become Lord Chancellor, okay, and the highest judicial office in England. So, however, in 1621 he was charged with accepting bribes and was removed from the office. So this fall from power was a dramatic and to a glittering political power, but it did not diminish his intellectual legacy. So now, why is the Bacon so important to us? Like I am also a student of literature, you are also a student of literature. Why it is important? So he is important for two major reasons. First, Bacon is widely regarded as the father of English essays because his essays were first published in in 1597. They were the first collection of essays in the English language. They gave a new form and a new direction to English prose. His essays are written in a concise and aphoristic style, short, sharp, memorable sentences that pack a great deal of meaning and wisdom into very few words into a very few words, remember. So this cover a wide range of human concern like knowledge, um, virtue, friendship, marriage, truth, ambition, revenge, and much more. And second, uh, Francis Bacon was also a major philosopher of science. Okay, he was not just just a minute, what Okay, as a philosopher of science, how it is work like I may not be that great in the pronunciation of this word. Novo Organum that is published in 1620. He challenged the old method of reasoning that had dominated Western thought since the ancient Greeks, and method that relied heavily on abstract argument and uh, deduction. Instead, Bacon argued for more inductive reasoning, building general conclusion from careful, systematic observation of the real world. So this approach became the foundation of modern, scientific inquiry. His famous, phrase, "Knowledge is power," as you can see on the slide, it captures this belief, like knowledge that comes from observation and experience gives us the power to understand and improve the world. So, dear learners, okay, Bacon was simultaneously a writer, philosopher, a scientist, a lawyer, and a statesman. Statesman. As we study his essay, we will see all these different dimensions of his personality came alive in his writings. The sharpness of a lawyer, the ambition of a statesman, the curiosities of a scientist, and the moral seriousness of a philosopher. Okay, now let's move on to the main discussion. That is Unit 1. So this is the Unit 1. So as you can see, this that is on op studies. So this essay was first published in 1597 and revised and expanded in 1622. Sorry, 1612. 16. It was written in first published in 1597, right? And it was expanded and also revised. Definitely, there will be like if you can see there's some books, there are some edition, right? Just like it was revised, that is in 1612. So even though it is short, it is packed with ideas. Maybe you're familiar already with this if you are from English background, English literature background, about the performance. So ideas, it is filled with ideas like perform, importance, purpose, and proper use of learning, and reading. So, as a student of English, this essays speak directly to your own lives as learners. Okay, so the writing style. Okay, the writing style of studies is aphoristics. So this is a very important term, uh, you know, and aphorism, uh, how to say in simple English, is a short, memorable statement that contains a general truth. Aphorism, that is aphorism, aphorism. A short, memorable statement that contains a truth. So think of like saying like time is money, or like actions speak louder than words. Quite common, right? This line. So those are aphorisms. Okay. So backend sciences is full of such compact, uh, quotable statement. They can also write in a Latinate style, like he uses vocabulary and references drawn from Latin learning. So which was the language of educated people in his time. So this gives his prose a formal, authoritative tone. Okay, so now let us look at the central argument as you can see on the right side, right? So Bacon opens the essay by telling us that studies that is all forms of learning and reading, like even this also, whatever what you're doing right now, like has three main purposes. What is it? What are they? The first purpose is delight. So this means we study for personal pleasure and intellectual satisfaction. When you sit down with a book that genuinely interests you and you read purely right because you enjoy it. So that is reading for delight. And the second purpose is ornament. This means that our learning helps us speak well and converse intelligently in any social situations. So an educated person can discuss a wide range of topics with confidence and grace. So the third purpose is ability. This, this means that studies equip us with, professionally. They give us the skills and knowledge that we need for our work. A judge studies law, a doctor studies medicine, a teacher of English studies literature and language. Right? So, see, as a teacher, I'm also teaching, sharing with you this English literature and also and also language studies. Right? So just like that. Why? So. Uh, Beckett then gives us one of the most celebrated and frequently quoted passages in all of English prose. Reading makes a man a full man, and conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. So let us unpack this. Reading gives us depth. It fills your mind with wide knowledge and diverse ideas. So conference, you know, which means discussion and conversation with others, makes you quick and ready in your thinking. It sharpens your mind through engagement with different viewpoints. And writing trains you to be precise and exact and disciplined in through, in thoughts. So, okay, discipline in thought. If you cannot write clearly about something, you have not yet understood it fully. So, this three-part formula is relevant today. It was in 1597. So, I can also classify books in a wonderful practical way. Some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and some few to be chewed and digested. So books that deserve only a quick glance. You taste them and you sample them lightly. Books that are informative and useful, but not profound. You swallow them quickly and from beginning to end. But a few rare, precious books deserves long, careful, and deep engagement. You chew them thoroughly and digest every idea. So ask yourself in your own reading life, which books have you tasted, which have you swallowed, and which have you truly chewed and digested? So this is another fascinating idea in this essay. Bacon describes studies as a form of mental medicine. He says that if your mind wanders and you find it difficult to concentrate, study mathematics because mathematics requires strict step-by-step attention and cannot tolerate a wandering mind. If you lack skill in argumentation, study law and rhetoric. If you lack historical perspective and wisdom, study history. And this is a remarkable insight. Different disciplines exercise and strengthen different intellectual faculties. So the mind, like the body, can be exercised, trained, and healed. Okay, so Beckett makes the crucial point that study alone is not enough. Studies perfect nature and are perfected by experience. So nature, meaning like natural ability and talent. Okay, is like a wide uncut plant. Without the cultivation of learning, it grows without direction or discipline. But at the same time, studies uh, that are not tested, and enriched by real-world experience remain abstract and incomplete. So true wisdom comes from combining reading and thinking with active engagement in life. So this is a lesson back and leaves us with at the end of unit one. So it is you know you as a learner of this you should take it seriously to this idea of these essays. Again, this will help you not only in examination in your practical life as well. All right, this is all about unit one. And now, as you can see in the unit two, just wait, let me just go. Okay, now let's move on to the of adversity. What is this of adversity? So, Bacon opens the essay by quoting the Roman Stoic philosopher like Seneca. Okay, so who distinguished between the goods of prosperity and the goods of adversity? Seneca said that the goods of prosperity are to be wished or desired. That is wealth, success, comfort, power. But the goods of adversity are to be admired. That is, they represent a higher, more noble form of human achievement. So this opening immediately signals Bacon's moral argument. Okay, so adversity is not merely hardship; it has a profound spiritual, you know, and moral value that prosperity simply cannot provide. Okay, so the central contrast of the essay is between prosperity and adversity. So Becker writes that prosperity is the blessing of Old Testament. Old Testament is again it is from the Holy Bible. That's why in the previous class also there is a mention of the Exodus, right? Exodus, it was probably Exodus, yes. So most of the literature are highly influenced by the Christianism. Okay, that's why you're getting all sort of these things. Okay, so there is the so Becker writes that prosperity is the blessing of the Old Testament. If you think about the great narratives of the Old Testament, they are filled with material reward like land, cattle, gold, political power, military victory. So, but adversity, Becker says, is the blessing of New Testament. There are two types of testament in Old Testament, Bible. That is one is Old Testament, the other New Testament. So the New Testament centers on the life, suffering, and the resurrection of Christ. So a story of hardship, sacrifice, and ultimate, spiritual triumph. So Bacon is drawing on a depth, not depth, sorry, deep theological and historical framework to argue that there are two levels of blessing: the outer blessings of material success and the inner blessings of character, fate, and moral strength, and also the inner blessing are far more valuable. Okay, so Bacon then introduces one of the most beautiful images in the essay, virtue as fragrance. He writes that just as the spices releases their richest, most powerful scent when they are crushed, ground, or burned, so to human virtue shows itself most brilliantly when we are under pressure, in pain, or facing great difficulty. Okay, so that's how human virtue shows. Okay, how when we are under pressure, in pain, and face great difficulty. A person who always live in comfortable and success may never truly know the depth of their own character. But adversity, loss, illness, failures, like injustice, acts as a test and a revealer of who we truly are. Think of people in your own life or in history who showed extraordinary courage and compassion, precisely because uh, they were suffering greatly. That is the essence of Bacon's arguments here. So Bacon also draws two classical myths. First, he invokes the story of Hercules, who sailed the vast ocean in a tiny earthen pot to rescue Prometheus. Right? But this image powerfully captures the idea that the human spirit, though like fragile on the outside, like a pot of clay, can accomplish extraordinary things through faith, courage, moral purpose. Okay. So secondly, uh, Prometheus himself is a figure who suffered endlessly or chained to a rock, tormented daily for the benefit of all humanity. So both needs celebrate stoic Christian virtue of fortitude. Okay, so the capacity to endure suffering without breaking, without losing faith, without surrendering one's morality. Okay, that is how the both meet celebrates the stoic and Christian virtue of fortitude. Okay, that is the capacity to endure suffering without breaking, without losing faith, without surrendering to one's moral integrity. All right. So now, next is so again, this what this leads to, like we have discussed here, right, about this classical myths. So this leads to key moral distinction of the essay. Moral tells us that the virtue, appropriate to prosperity is temperance. That is the ability to remain moderate, humble, and balanced when things are going well, and not to be corrupted by success. But the virtue appropriate to adversity is fortitude, the ability to endure difficulty with courage, patience, and continued wit. So of the two, they can consider fortitude the more heroic and more admirable, more quality. So it is relatively easy to be good and moderate when life is comfortable. It is truly great, truly admirable to remain morally upright or even to grow in character when life becomes hard. Okay, so the lesson, in the lesson Bacon leaves us with, of adversities that do not simply endure hardship passively, engage with it actively as an opportunity for self-discovery, okay, and for moral growth, for the development of your deepest and best qualities. So every period of difficulty in your life is also a training ground. Okay, so the people who are emerged from adversity are stronger, wiser, more compassionate, and more capable are the ones who have truly absorbed, you know, Okay, and also the message, the moral message of this essay. Okay, so see to it. Go through this essay. You will really learn something new that will really help you in your life. Even me, see, I have already completed BA, MA, PhD, all these things. Still, I'm reading these things. I'm reading, again, revising the things. Next, we shall move on to the unit 3. Okay, why rest of the students are not joining? Okay. Next, that is about of marriage and of single life. So, this perhaps most socially controversial essay, and it requires us to engage with it both critically and contextually. So let me uh, set the scene before we discuss the ideas, main ideas, the discuss the ideas in detail. So Beckett himself did not marry until he was in his late 40s. Okay, he had a complex personal and social life. In this essay, he writes with characteristic Renaissance pragmatism, like meaning he approaches marriage not as a romantic or sentimental subject, but as a social and moral institution to be analyzed rationally and practically. He weighs the practical advantages and disadvantages of married life versus single life in a very analytical, almost clinical manner. You may agree with some of his observations, and you may strongly disagree with others, and that is entirely appropriate. So, good literary study, means engaging critically with a text, not simply accepting everything the author says. So the essay opens with one of the most provocative sentences in Bacon's entire body of work. So, like he that he that had wife and children had given hostage to fortune, but they are impediments to great enterprises, either of virtue or mischief. So this is a striking metaphor. Bacon is saying that her wife and the children are like hostage held by a fate, because the married man is always worried about their safety and well-being. He cannot take the bold, decisive actions that a single man can. He must be cautious, careful, and conservative. He cannot risk everything on one great venture because too many people depend on him. However, Beckett does not simply favor the single life over the married life. He also argued that marriage disciplines and humanizes man. Married men, he says, think about posterity. They plan for the future, for their children and their grandchildren. They invest in the long term rather than living entirely for the present moment. So unmarried men, on the other hand, tend to be more self-centered and present focused. So they may be freer and more adventurous, but they often lack the humanizing discipline of domestic responsibility. So Beckett then goes to compare the roles of uh, married and unmarried man across different areas of social life. For the church, bachelors give more freely to charitable causes because they have fewer financial obligations. For the military married men and safe to fight harder because they have families to protect and are therefore more strongly motivatedly. I mean, married men, not married men, yeah. Therefore, they're more like strongly motivated. Okay, what did I just say? For military married men, they are said to have what? Said to fight harder because they have their families to protect. That's why they are more strongly motivated compared to bachelor. Okay, for the judicially married men, demonstrate greater steadiness ethical commitment, and moral responsibility. So Bacon is suggesting that different roles in society call for different kinds of men. So the essay also contained one of the most quoted and debated aphorism in Becket's writing, wives are, young men's mistresses, companions for middle age, and old men's nurses. So what Beckett means is that at different stages of a man's life, the relationship with his wife takes on a different character. In youth, a wife provides romance and passion. In a middle age, she becomes a companion and partner in a shared life. And in old age, she becomes a caregiver and support. And this aphorism captures something universal about how relationships evolve. Though the way Bacon frames it entirely from the male point of view, reflects the patriarchal assumptions of his time. Okay, so on the question of what qualities a wife should have, Bacon prizes uh, chastity and obedience, and he adds that a wise husband earns both. So these views are very much products of the Elizabethan and Jacobean period, and we must read them critically and understand their historical and cultural context while also recognizing their, you know, uh, limitation when judged by the values of equality and human rights that we hold today. As students of literature, as learners of literature, our task is not to judge the past by the present, but to understand the past on its own term, and then engage thoughtfully, thoughtfully with what is still relevant and what we must leave behind. Okay, that is all about of my rich and single life. Next is uh, of truth. So here, uh, uh, this is a profound and like beautifully like crafted meditation on the nature of truth. The human tendency to deceive and be deceived. The importance of honesty and the spiritual dimensions of truth seeking. So Bacon begins the essay with a brilliant opening metaphor. Okay, he quotes Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor who presided at the trial of Jesus Christ. So Pilate asked the famous question, "What is truth?" And then, without waiting for an answer, turned and walked away. Bacon uses this image to make a penetrating observation about human nature. Most of us, ask the question of truth at some point in our lives, but very few of us are truly willing to stop, wait, and search for the answer. We are impatient, we are too busy, and often we are afraid of what the truth might demand of us. This opening sets the tone for the entire essay. Bacon then asks, why do human beings love falsehood so much? He defines, sorry, he you know identifies three main reasons. So the first is that finding truth requires sustained effort, patience, and intellectual disciplines. And the most people prefer the easier path of assumption, habit, and comfortable belief. So the second reason is that truth restricts human freedom. If you know the truth about something, if you know, for example, that a certain action is wrong, you can no longer pretend you do not know. Truth creates moral responsibility, and that feels like a burden. So the third reason is the most psychologically interesting. Lacan says there is a human nature, and nature, though corrupt love of the lie itself, a kind of strange, deep-seated pleasure, deception, and a creation of false, you know, impression. Okay, So these are the things. So Bacon then uses two wonderfully vivid images to contrast truth and falsehood. And he writes, uh, it's like the truth he writes is like daylight, open daylight, clear, direct, and revealing. A lie, like a candlelight, soft, more flattering, more comfortable to live in. Trust is like a pearl, more beautiful, most valuable when seen in clear, natural light. A lie is like a diamond; it sparkles and dazzles, most brilliant under very indirect and carefully arranged lighting. Okay, so this image is deeply insightful. It tells us, okay, that falsehood can genuinely attractive. It can look beautiful and impressive, but only because it depends on manipulating how things are presented and perceived. Remove, uh, remove the false lightning and the diamond sparkle disappears. Okay, so just like that, Beckett also gives us gives truth a theological and cosmic dimension. He draws on the account of creation in the book of Genesis. In Genesis, God's very first act of creation is the creation of light, the light of the physical world, and His last act of creation is the bestowal of the light of reason upon humanity, the capacity to think, to reason, to seek truth. Okay, that is the thing. So Beckett argues that to search for truth, therefore, is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a sacred and divine act. It is humanity's participation. Excuse So it is sacred and divine act, right? So it is humanity's participation in the creative, you know, illuminating the purpose of God. So truth seeking is, in this sense, like it is a form of worship. Okay, so in the final section of the essay, Bacon turns out to what he calls the truth of civil business, civil life. So by which he means honestly in everyday human relationship, like social interaction and public life. So he quotes the French essayist Montaigne. Okay, a liar is brave towards God and a coward towards men. A liar defies the divine principle of truth and at the same time deceive those around him. Bacon argues that lie corrupts, the fabric of human, society just as an uh, uh, alloy corrupts the purity of God. So it debates what should be noble and pure. And he ends with a solemn warning. Persistent deception will ultimately invite divine judgment. Okay, so what we should take away of truth. This is Bhagavad is asking each of us to examine our own relationship with truth in our thoughts, in our words, in our dealing with others. Truth is not just an abstract philosophical category; it is a living moral force. And our daily choices about honesty and deception matter, like intellectually, socially, morally, and also spiritually. It's all about truth. Now, the last unit, it is uh, of revenge. So here, Beckett opens the essay with a definition that is both memorable and thought-provoking. So revenge is a kind of wild justice, right? So let us pause here and think carefully about what this means. Justice, in a formal sense, is the systematic, measured, and a fair response to wrongdoing that society administers through its laws and courts, right? But when a person takes personal revenge, when they strike back at someone who wronged them outside the system of law, they are attempting something that looks like judge, but but is uncontrolled, emotional, and lawless. They're acting more like animal than like citizens of civilized society. Okay, so and this is exactly why Bacon argues that law must be stepped in and suppress the impulse for private revenge. If every person were allowed to take their own vengeance, the entire system of civil order would collapse. Okay, so Beckett, most powerful moral insight in this essay is this: when you take a revenge, the best you can achieve is to be equal with your enemy. Right? You're as good as your enemy if you take a revenge. So you have matched their wrong with your wrong, and you're even now. You're equal. So if you choose to forgive, if you pass over the wrong and move forward, you are more superior. You have risen above the enemy. Because says that uh, the capacity to forgive is the quality of a prince or a ruler. It is the mark of a truly great person. Revenge is the response of a small, wounded mind. So true moral greatness is not found in retaliation but in the capacity of transcend impulse rates altogether. Okay, Bacon then reflects on the motives behind. Bacon actually reflects on the motives behind this wrongdoing. Why do people do wrong to each other in the first place? Why do you wrong your friend? Okay, something like that. He argued that people rarely harm others purely on outside of abstract wickedness or lies. They usually do because they are seeking some advantages for themselves, like profit, measure, honor, or power. If that is the case, Bacon argues that not to hate or despise someone who wrong us simply because they were acting in their own self-interest. It is he says, like hating a thorn bush for having thorns. It cannot help its nature. This will act of sheer, unprovoked lies are rare. Even they are more to be pitied than hated. All right. So Bacon also makes an important distinction between private revenge and public revenge. Private revenge is like personal acts of vengeance and keeps wounds open, prolong hatreds, and ultimately destroy the peace of uh, of person seeking revenge. And then peace of mind who of the person who seeking revenge for more than the person being revenge upon. So the anger, the avenge, but the rage becomes the consumed by bitterness, living with pagans calls like which like a wretched life, always fixated on the past, always plotting, always unable to move forward. So, but public revenge, the punishment of tyrants by the state or history can, in some circumstances, be uh, historically justified. That's why Bacon gives examples of Julius Caesar and Henry III of France. Like both were killed after periods of tyranny and their deaths, while violent and serve a larger social and historical purpose. All right. So now Bacon ends the essay, these arguments, with a profound spiritual, observation drawn from the biblical story of Job. So Job's spirit reminds us that we accept the good things God gave us without questioning or complaining. Why then do we refuse to accept the difficult things? Friends who wrong us, perhaps unknowingly or in an known in a moment of wickedness, maybe instruments of a larger providence of a divine plan that we cannot fully see or understand from our limited human perspective. So now the core examples of message of revenge is this: the highest form of moral strength is not ability to strike back, but the wisdom and grace to forgive, to release the past, to focus on the present and future. Okay, that is the thing. So revenge keeps keeps you chained to the person. So, so revenge keeps you chained to the person who wronged you. So forgiveness sets you free. Unless you can't forgive, you'll not be free of that chain. So this is Beckham's final and most profound word on the subject, and it is a lesson worth carrying with you. You know, long after this course is over. Okay, after this lecture is over, this essay is over. Not like that. Keep studying, keep studying. You learn something totally new. So this is the end of unit 5, and all the 5 minutes and all the short essays by uh, you know Francis Bacon. Okay. Now next is uh, check your progress report again, just like the previous lecture. Here also have given you 3 questions. Please see to it. This question will be very important for you. It will help you understand better this all the essays. See, out of 5 essays, I have given you three essays as a assignment. This is to see whether you have understood what I have discussed in the online with you. Okay, if you have not understood anything, please let me know after the class. All right. If you need extra classes on this, so these are the 3 questions. Please solve this solve this 3 questions and send it to me. Next is what we have covered today. As you can see, today we have covered five. I am not going to read all this point now. So we have covered 5 units, 5 essays of Francis Bacon. Like of study, we have covered of studies, of university, of marriage and single life, and of truth and of revenge. We have covered all these essays today. So next, in the next lecture, we shall focus on Charles Lamb. That is block 2 Charles Lambs from unit 6 to unit 10. Okay, so that's all. Uh, Thank you for attending the class. And if you have any question now, you may raise. If not, we conclude with this. Okay. If you do not have any questions, then we stop here. Okay. Rest of the papers, I may take on the working days like between Monday to Friday. Any day I will take because right now I am the only faculty here in the English department, so it's quite difficult to take all the classes. So because after this class, I shall have to take your UG program classes also. That's why today I'm taking only 2 papers courses, and maybe Monday or Tuesday I'll take, or maybe on Wednesday I will take 2 or 3 more classes, MA classes. Okay, so let's stop here, and thank you again, and see you in the next class.